do have Michael Penix Jr. backing him up, but the NFL is a crazy world, and it's completely unpredictable. So I would say the floor is 7 wins, and then the ceiling is maybe it could be 12 wins. I mean, that could be a ceiling, 12 wins. Win a playoff game or maybe 2. Maybe go to the conference championship game. That could be the ceiling for the Falcons. I mean, that might be crazy. I mean, people might think that that's hype, but it's possible now with the pieces they put in place. Also, you got to see how these two
the podcast where the mic drops happen. This is the SHAE Show.
Okay. Let's go. Get ready, let's go. They can't stop you. No, they can't stop you. No, they can't stop you. They can't stop you. No, they can't stop you. Don't let them stop you. Back against the wall.
And welcome to the 12th episode of the SHAE Show. As I will be kicking off this episode, of course, I'm your host, SHAE. You already know this, but from Espn himself, Mr. March Raimondi. Marc, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Hey, I'm just glad to get this day started. So to all of you who don't know, he is your beat reporter from Espn for your fellow Atlanta Falcons, which is why I brought him on the show, because there's a lot that has happened in the ATL this in back-to-back off seasons. So before we get started on that, and as I already introduced your name, I'm just going to give you the opportunity that I give all my very special guests, an opportunity which is to introduce yourself, how you got started, your journey, things of that nature.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First of all, that's a good question because I am relatively new again to covering the NFL. It's been a while since I've covered the NFL. I was a combat sports reporter for the last 11 years, covering mostly the UFC, some boxing, some WWE, some pro wrestling. I did that for a really long time. But before that, I covered a bunch of different sports up in New York. NFL, NBA, MLB, a bunch of different stuff, high schools, colleges, for the New York Post and SNY up there in New York and a bunch of other places, Newsday. But for the last 11 years before April of this year, I covered the UFC mainly, and I was that was my main beat, and I traveled the world covering the UFC. And in April, I made the move over to the NFL team at ESPN. I've been with ESPN for over 5 years now in total. So my first week on the Falcons beat was draft week, which was a very eventful week, and it's been a very eventful few months down here in Atlanta. I just moved here in April as well from Los Angeles. So it's keeping me very busy, SHAE. It's keeping me very busy.
Yeah, it definitely is. And when you speak on covering the draft, how did that go for you? Because we all know that let's just say your fans wasn't the happiest when they found out that you guys were acquiring or drafting Penix from, I believe he came from Washington, if I'm not mistaken. What was your reaction when they took him with the 8th overall pick after signing Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, it was definitely polarizing, right? And before you say you guys, I'm not the Falcons, right? I didn't make that pick. That was the front office. I'm just a reporter for ESPN covering the team the way that that you're in the media as well. I don't take ownership of them. I just cover them. Credit or discredit. I did not draft Michael Penix Jr. In April, but it was SHAE. It was super polarizing. A lot of people, especially in the national media, thought that the Falcons were kind of crazy, to be honest with you, because they had just signed Kirk Cousins to this big money contract. They gave him $100 million guaranteed, and he was their quarterback. That was it. That was going to be it. They needed a quarterback in the offseason. They got their quarterback. And then the plan, or at least everyone thought, was, what are they going to do in the draft? Get defense. They needed a pass rusher. They needed someone, that was going to defend, because that had been, a weakness also for the Falcons. So they got their quarterback. they were going to get their defense, their defender, their pass rush, their edge in the draft with the number 8 pick. That didn't happen. They took Michael Penix Jr. from Washington, as you said, another quarterback, and it kind of like blew everyone's minds, right? On draft night, it was the story of the draft, and people were very confused. But honestly, I think that in the 4 months or so since then, I think it's aged pretty well in the sense that Michael Penix Jr. is playing pretty well in practice. He played pretty well in that first preseason game last week against Miami, and he is the successor to Kirk Cousins. Cousins is turning 36 years old this month. He has all that money guaranteed, but there is a little bit of an opt-out after the second year. So I think that they're looking at a transition plan at one point. And now, of course, we know, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit, that the Falcons have now gotten that edge rush that they needed.
Oh, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that because, it's trending. It's trending. And, acquiring Kirk Cousins, I think, was more of a bridge because they know that him being 36, they're eventually going to have to find somebody younger so they won't be in a predicament where if it's over for him, they don't have anyone else to go to. And this is how all businesses go. See, people fail to understand the NFL is a business. And in businesses, when you have a plan A, you always have to have a plan B because sometimes plan A don't work out as well as you thought it did. And I think that's what Falcon fans just don't understand. He's coming off of an Achilles injury. That's major. And then to be his age. So I think what it was is they're not trying to draft Penix to win now. I think what it is, they're trying to get him prepared as much so he can possibly be the quarterback of the future. But his age and all of that, we know how that can play out. They're saying he's pretty old to be a draft pick, but you never know when your number's called. And the cons of being a backup or being in the pros or being on any type of sports team whatsoever is that regardless of whether you're the first option or the last, you have to be ready at all times because you never know. So it could be before week 1, it could be after week 1, because an injury or a situation where he stinks it up is honestly practically unpredictable. And I think that would be fair when it comes to the criticism or speaking on the Falcons and the quarterback situation, signing Kirk Cousins to the amount of money they did and then drafting someone. I think what it is that they're trying to do what they can to compete now, but they realize that, okay, we got a 36-year-old quarterback. We have to build for the future as well.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think you're right on the money with that. I think that I'm not so sure if I would go as far as to call Kirk Cousins a bridge quarterback because he could be, but it's also possible that he plays well this year, next year, and they want to bring him back. We don't really know what's going to happen. Outside of the injury, he was showing no signs of slowing down. He was playing, really as well as he ever played in Minnesota before the Achilles last year. So it's one of those things where, they're going to take it as it comes, and they're in a position if they need to, they can give the ball to Michael Penix Jr. in 2026, and he can be the guy. And that's that. And I don't think that's the worst idea in the world, especially when you consider all the money that the quarterbacks have gotten in their extensions over the last few months since Kirk Cousins was signed. He looks like a bargain right now for the Atlanta Falcons. When you look at what Trevor Lawrence is making, what Tua in Miami is making, guys like that, I'm sure Dak Prescott is going to get, but they're going to back the Brinks truck up to
Don't forget Joe Burrow.
So I think that in the last 4 months, that pick has aged very well. And I think Penix is going to have a really good, if you have people in the building in Flowery Branch, Georgia, people are really high on him for the future. And they're high on Kirk Cousins for the present because he's done very, very well in practice. Yeah.
And Kirk Cousins, you can argue, is extremely underrated in football because he's someone who just don't get the attention. And you can argue if he would have had a better team in Minnesota, we probably could be talking about him like we talked about Dak Prescott in Dallas because they're like, to me, the same exact caliber quarterback. And you could definitely win a couple of games with Kirk Cousins. You can win more than 7 games is what I'm saying. And in a very vulnerable NFC South division, which we're also going to get into, it's hard to rule out the Falcons. You know, they can possibly be a dark horse pick because if I'm not mistaken, if memory serves me correctly, we looked at the strength of schedules and we watched how they're ranked. The Steelers are top 3, who's my team, is top 3 of the toughest schedules in football heading into 2024, while the Falcons is top 3 of the weakest schedules heading into 2024. And with the Steelers, they're arguably in the toughest division of the AFC North in the entire league. And then you have the Falcons, who without question is in the weakest, because I'm looking at Kirk Cousins and I'm looking at the rest of the NFC South, and I'm like, okay, you got Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay, but you got Derek Carr, but he doesn't play well against your safety, Jesse Bates. And then you got Bryce Young practically by himself with J.C. Horn or Jossie Horn, correct me. I'm not sure which one of those names is right. But you got Horn right there in the cornerback position in Carolina. But that's pretty much it. Von Bell went back to the Bengals. So you are thin at safety. You're thin at cornerback. You're just... I don't know what's going on with the Panthers. The Panthers, are they even a team, or they just a complete mess that is just thrown on people's schedule? That remains to be seen. So it's hard to rule out a team with all the, with all the acquisitions they made this offseason and last season, and with, termination of Arthur Smith, who is now the offensive coordinator of the Steelers, hiring Raheem Morris, the former defensive coordinator for the LA Rams. So he coached Aaron Donald, he coached Jalen Ramsey, he coached Eric Weddle at one point, he coached, Troy Hill, he coached a lot of, great defensive players, good average. He coached them all on all levels, basically. So you got a defensive-minded coach. He has a great shot, in my opinion, of having a Nico Ryan or, DeMeco Ryans, if I said his last name right, from the Texans. He has a strong possibility of having that type of impact this year because vulnerable division, arguably the most stacked roster, if not top 5 of the most stacked rosters in your conference already, vulnerable schedule. So you could definitely favor the Falcons to at least be a playoff team this season. But before we get into this season, we got to talk about last season because I think a lot of fans just washed their hands. They wanted the house clean because of the up and downs. You started off pretty well. I think you was 2-0 or 2-1, and then it just went downhill. It was just inconsistency, quarterbacks in and out. Neither one of them played out well. What is your overall recap of this season?
Yeah, I think what you just said, Raheem Morris at the Combine said something really interesting. He said that he probably wouldn't even be there talking to us in the media if there was better quarterback play in Atlanta last year because the combination of Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke just did not get the job done. Heineke is a guy that started games in the NFL and he's won games in the NFL, but last year combining with Desmond Ridder, who kind of underperformed as a guy that they thought could be their quarterback of the future, just didn't work out. Didn't work out with either of those guys. Heineke's still on the team as a backup right now. Desmond Ridder got traded away to the Arizona Cardinals and they brought in Kirk Cousins because look, I mean, quarterback is the most important position, right? And one of the reasons, as we just talked about with Michael Penix Jr., why the Falcons wanted to get him in the draft is because after Matt Ryan, because obviously Matt Ryan was the franchise quarterback in Atlanta for over a decade, right? And he's maybe the greatest Falcon of all time. I think a lot of people would agree with that he's the greatest Falcon of all time. They had no succession plan. There was no plan for someone to come after him. And I think the franchise is still a little bit traumatized, scarred from the lack of a succession plan after Matt Ryan, because it was, the Marcus Mariotas and the Desmond Ridders and, like we mentioned. And that's one of the reasons why they wanted to have Michael Penix Jr. But last year it was just a mess. And they have these great skill position players. Bijan Robinson is one of the best running backs in the NFL. He was a rookie last year. And he was not used up to his potential because of bad quarterback play. And a lot of fans, want to criticize Arthur Smith's play calling in that regard. But, you have Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, the other running back, was a 1,000-yard rusher as a rookie. Kyle Pitts is one of the most explosive, talented tight ends in the NFL. Drake London is an incredible wide receiver. So you have all these pieces on offense, and they just underperformed at such a level last year that really was disappointment. And the Falcons went 7-10 for 3 years in a row. I mean, 3 years in a row of that. It wasn't even that they were bad, right? And then they would get a great draft pick. They were just mediocre. And that's almost worse than being bad in the NFL, because if you're bad, you at least get like a top 5 pick and you can maybe, rebuild the roster little by little. They were just flat out mediocre over the last few years. And that's why they kind of they tried to revamp the offense, and now they've done some revamping of the defense as well.
Yeah, and it's when you revamp the defense like you do, what do you think will be the approach for them heading in the future? Do you think they're going to be more of an offensive team like the Chiefs, the Bengals, the 49ers, or are they going to go, let's say, the Steelers route and make sure that even though you need strength and you need ball players on your offense, you're going to become more of a defensive team, because this is the third team in the league now that has a defensive-minded coach. Pittsburgh with Mike Tomlin, Nico Ryans with the Texans, and then you got Raheem Morris now with the Falcons.
Yeah, I think that remains to be seen. I think the team is still kind of trying to find its identity through training camp. And if you would have asked me 36 hours ago, I would have said this is definitely going to be a good offensive team. And the defense had a lot of question marks, but they've made some moves in the last 24 to 36 hours. They've picked up Matthew Judon in a trade from New England, and now they've signed Justin Simmons, a safety who, is one of the best safeties in the league, and Judon has been one of the best pass rushers in the league over the last, 4 or 5 seasons. So they've completely reformed the defense just in the last few hours. We haven't even seen these guys practice yet, on the grass at Flowery Branch. They haven't even been in Atlanta yet. So there's a lot still to be seen as far as how this Atlanta team is going to look when week 1 comes along. But on the offensive side of the ball, SHAE, I'll say, I've been in every practice here in Atlanta since training camp began and going back to OTAs. The offense looks pretty potent. Kirk Cousins has been really consistent. He's been really productive back there under center. And, Drake London is getting the ball. Kyle Pitts is getting the ball. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, all those guys that I mentioned before, who people maybe complained about that they were not being utilized correctly. These are all guys that are getting the ball. Even guys like Darnell Mooney, who the Falcons signed in the offseason from the Bears, and Ray McLeod, who was kind of like an under-the-radar wide receiver selection. He's been great in the slot as well. So Cousins has weapons. We know who he is, right? He's not he's not the best quarterback in the NFL, but he is darn productive. Only 2 quarterbacks since 2020 have had more touchdown passes than Kirk Cousins. Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen. That's pretty good company for Kirk Cousins. So we know who he is, and he has the players around him. So on paper, should be a pretty good offense. And now the defense looks like it could be getting there as well.
Yeah, and I think with the inquiries that happened this offseason, that definitely helped out your offense. We can agree that they upgraded at the quarterback position. I think we could definitely agree with that, at least on paper. And we can agree that, they definitely, and it's going to open up a lot. Like, they did make some moves on the offensive line. They did, get possibly a backup quarterback that can do some things with, just in case things don't work out with Kirk Cousins, they can fall back. So they did get a great fallback plan. But when you look at this, I think this year's roster on the Falcons, and the point that I'm trying to get to is that I think this offense, unlike last year's offense, would definitely take pressure off your defense, which can allow more plays to be made. I think that will be a great, argument you can make, because you got Bijan Robinson, like you said, one of the best running backs in football. It's only like maybe 3 backs you'll put over him, maybe only 1, because there's only one running back who had more of anything than him, arguably, like, who beat him in all categories, and that's Christian McCaffrey, who beat everybody. Then, only he has more touches than Bijan Robinson. But because the upgrades on the offensive line this year, because of the acquisitions that just occurred for your defense, Matthew Budon, then you just got Justin Simmons, who we're going to get a little more into. Obviously, you have Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell, who's already been there. And then you got a pretty decent defensive line. So it's just, what would be the expectations for your offense heading into the season after all these acquisitions and upgrading everywhere that they have question marks about?
I think you have to hope, if you're a Falcons fan, that they're at least, a top 10, if not a top 5 offense in the NFL. I think they have that capability because, as you mentioned, the offensive line is also very good. Chris Lindstrom is one of the best guards. Jake Matthews is a guy that's been a stalwart at left tackle since Matt Ryan was the quarterback. He's still there, and he's still as solid as ever there. So that's a strength of the team. One could argue that might be one of the biggest strengths of the team, the offensive line. So you have those guys protecting Kirk, and he's going to have time to throw the ball, and he has weapons. Drake London, I saw him in practice yesterday, and he made 3 incredible catches where they were basically essentially jump balls. And he's so big and he's so physical, and his hands are so incredible. And he can really dominate with the right quarterback, and which he has not had in his NFL career. And then you look at a guy like Kyle Pitts, and I think SHAE, if you're talking about who's really a guy that can show something this year, I think all those guys that I mentioned, Bijan, Drake, even Tyler Algier, Kyle Pitts, as a rookie, one of the greatest rookie seasons in the history of the NFL at tight end, right? We're talking about Pro Bowl, over 1,000-yard rushing, going back to first rookie since Mike Ditka and Jeremy Shockey to do such things as a rookie tight end. He did not have a great quarterback throwing to him then, nor did he last year. And now he is in year 4, and he can really break out with a guy like Kirk Cousins if he's healthy. That was one of the other issues with Pitts, is that he wasn't healthy 2 years ago. Last year, he was still a little banged up from that injury as well. And if he's healthy, and he says he is, it could be a really, really big year. It's been fun to watch Kirk Cousins throw the ball to Kyle Pitts, especially in one-on-one drills where Kyle Pitts is going one-on-one with the safety. I don't want to mention anybody's name, SHAE, but Kyle Pitts is kind of abusing these guys out there in those one-on-one drills. He's a man against boys, and he is scoring at will. And it's been one of my favorite things to watch this entire summer, this entire training camp. Again, I don't want to mention anybody's names, but Kyle Pitts has looked very impressive in those drills because he's just so big and physical and athletic. He can make plays in the air, and he can make plays with his feet. It's impressive to watch.
Yeah, I think Kyle Pitts, this can be a breakout year for him because, we already established, they upgraded in all the needs. You can argue based off the positions, But speaking of upgrades and moving on, we have to cover this because this is the one thing the Falcon fans has definitely called for all of 2023 was to fire Arthur Smith. So when the news broke out that you were fired, that not you, but the Falcons, correct me, were, fired head coach Arthur Smith after 3 straight 7-10 seasons. He was the former offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. He did pretty well there, which is why he got the job. But your overall reaction on him being fired, and then you guys hiring Raheem Morris as your next head coach in Atlanta. What was your overall reaction? What was the talks? And what did the organization say, exactly within these moves that were made?
I think, in the NFL, it's a results-based business, right? And I think that you, at least if you're Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, you at least wanted to see some kind of progress, right? You want to see some kind of upward mobility. So you go 7-10 in year 1 with Arthur Smith. And then in year 2, you go 7-10 again, right? So in year 3, you gotta at least have a winning season. You gotta make the playoffs. You have to have something to show that you're not just plateauing, because 7-10 again is it's not awful. There's something there. They're winning 7 games, but it's also not good enough to win the division or make the playoffs or have a winning record. The Falcons not had a winning record since 2017. It's been a while. So if you're Arthur Blank, you get a little impatient because it's you want to at least see progress. And then this last year happened, and as you mentioned, they got off to a good start, and things looked like they were getting better. And even with, and look, I know people do, I know Falcons fans do kill Arthur Smith, but again, it was a lot about the quarterback play. There's no doubt about that. Quarterbacks are I don't want to repeat myself, but it's the most important position. You need a competent quarterback there to win games, to make the playoffs. If you don't have one, it's going to be really, really tough for you. It's just going to be hard. Even as good as the defense could be and the rest of the offense, you need that quarterback because the ball is in his hands. So they go 7-10 again. They kind of collapse down the stretch. And I think if you're Arthur Blank and you're the organization, you don't have really much of a choice. I think you have to let Arthur Smith go. And they did talk to Bill Belichick for a little bit, right? That didn't come to fruition. I know some Falcons fans were excited about that possibility, but if you ask anybody around the league about Raheem Morris, you're not going to find a lot of people saying negative things. He's a very positive guy. He's very charismatic. He's now been an assistant on 2 Super Bowl winning teams, one in Tampa and one in Los Angeles, so with the Rams. And also he was in Atlanta. He was in Atlanta for several years. He caught the he won a Super Bowl, and he went to the Super Bowl in Atlanta. He didn't win. As Falcons fans know, he did not win that game, although it was close. 28-3 was the score, if you remember that one. So there is that history with him here in Atlanta. He was the interim head coach at one point. He already had a relationship with Arthur Blank and with people in the franchise. So it was not a difficult decision, I don't think, ultimately to bring Raheem Morris back to Atlanta, because he's gotten more experience under his belt since the last time he was here. He's gotten a lot more experience under his belt since the last time he was a full-time head coach like he was in Tampa after John Gruden left, which was many years ago. So he's here, and people seem to really like him a lot. The players really like him a lot. He's an extremely positive guy. He's really he feels like a leader. Like, guys really want to follow him. And so far so good. Again, it's a results-based business. So we're going to see how good of a coach Raheem Morris here is in a few weeks as the season gets closer. But as of right now, it seems like everything is very positive, in Flowery Branch, Georgia.
Yeah, and rightfully so, because you got guys like Jalen Ramsey, who's been top 10 of the best defenders in the league for the past since he got started. So when you got guys like that and guys like Aaron Donald, who you can argue is the greatest defensive player of all time, speaking positive about him, being happy about the hire, guys like Ramsey been pushing for him to get a head coaching job for months now, regardless of how much he obviously loved him in LA, playing for the Rams as a defensive coordinator, but he knew the type of caliber, coach and person Raheem Morris is. So do you think that it can be possible, or do you expect Raheem Morris to have the same impact as DeMeco Ryans had with the Houston Texans last year, headed into the 2024 season?
Yeah, it's possible. It's definitely very possible. I think that Raheem has more experience than DeMeco Ryans. He's older. He's been around the league for a long time now, right? Raheem Morris. He's been around the league for 2 decades. And he's coached at every level, including head coach before. So he's learned a lot of lessons. But he's not an old guy, right? He's in his 50s. He's still a young guy. He's still vibrant. He gets up very, very early every morning, SHAE, to work out. He's in really good shape. He's I think he has like 3:30 a.m. or 4 a.m. Oh my God, I can't even imagine that. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I think has taken a little bit from everyone that he's coached with, whether it's a John Gruden or a Sean McVay. Really little bits and pieces from everyone that he's been with, and Dan Quinn. So I think that he's ready for this role. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But being ready and turning that into results is a whole different thing. And that's the fun about football, is that we get to find out.
Yeah. And it's going to be a pretty exciting season because everyone has made big moves. But obviously you got teams like the Falcons who said the season ain't, technically didn't start yet, because kickoff of the regular season ain't till I think September 8th, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it's a little before then. We know it starts with the Chiefs and the Ravens. I got to get my dates right. But so it's like it's a wait and see process. But you know what? I don't think anyone can be in the ATL this season and not have their popcorn ready, regardless of how the season play out. But obviously, you want it to be better. And speaking of acquisitions and speaking of wanting your team to be better, now it's time to get into it, because this was headline worthy. Like, you just got one of the best pass rushers, arguably in the league, within Matthew Sutton from the New England Patriots, right? For an exchange of basically a bag of chips. This dude had, if I'm not mistaken, nearly over 30 sacks his 3 years in New England. And when you get a guy like that, obviously you well needed it. That's why you made the move, but you didn't even give up much. Like, you still got your first rounds, you still got your second round picks. It's like, okay, third round, take it, whatever. We'll roll the dice with him. What was your over? And then before I even ask that, you signed one of the best safeties in football, arguably top 5, definitely top 10 in Justin Simmons. 4-time, all-pro safety. What was your overall reaction to acquiring not one, but both of them less than 72 hours, less than 1 week?
I think the only reaction is it's pretty firm now that the Falcons think they have a team that can either contend or I mean, I think maybe they thought they had a contender and now they're trying to take things to the next level. They had a team that that could be a winning team, and they're trying to turn a winning team into possibly a team that's contending for a championship. And when you bring in a guy like Matthew Judon, a guy like Justin Simmons, that's kind of the signal that you're doing, because these are guys that are in their 30s. They're established veterans. You know what you're getting already. And the defense for the Falcons was the big question mark, because as we spoke about before, SHAE, they did a great job in the offseason. Terry Fontenot, the GM, did a great job in the offseason, bringing in a Kirk Cousins, bringing in Darnell Mooney, and fixing that offense and making it, a team, like I said, that could be possibly a top 5 or 10 offense in the entire NFL this coming year. But the defense is not something that they really addressed aggressively. They did get some good defensive linemen in the draft. One of them, an outside linebacker and edge, Raylan Trice, their 3rd-round pick, actually he just came up with a knee injury at the preseason game in Miami, and he's out for the season. So that also necessitated some kind of a move. They needed to do something, because that was one of the guys they were going to depend on to rush the passer. So the Falcons have not had a double-digit sack leader since 2016 when Vic Beasley was in Atlanta. It's been a minute since the Falcons have had a guy that can get to the quarterback. They've been one of the worst teams pressuring the quarterback over the last few years. Over the last 5 seasons, the Falcons have had 23 fewer sacks than any team in the league. I mean, they're the worst team as far as sacks, over for a half decade. So they didn't do anything really in the offseason to address that. And that was one of the criticisms of taking Penix. It was like, well, you could have taken an edge. You could have taken a pass rush with that number 8 pick, and you didn't do it. But now Terry Fontenot has redeemed himself, and they have gotten Matthew Judon from the New England Patriots, as you mentioned, for a 3rd-round pick. And, that's not nothing, but Matthew Judon is one of the best pass rushers over the last several years in the NFL. He's right up there in every category. Dude had 15.5 sacks 2 seasons ago. He missed most of last season with a torn bicep, but in his 4 games that he played, he had 4 sacks. So this is a guy that puts sack numbers on the board. And that is something that Atlanta has needed for so long, going back to that Super Bowl team. It's been that long since they've had a guy like Matthew Judon. Now, what happens after this year, I don't know. He doesn't have a contract for 2025 yet. I'm not sure what they do, but for 2024, he's going to be in Atlanta. And then Justin Simmons, you pair him with Jesse Bates, and now we're talking about potentially the best combination of safeties in the entire league. I mean, Jesse Bates, Madden 25, highest rated safety, right? And now you add Justin Simmons, who has had more interceptions than anyone in the league over the last several years. So it's been an incredible 48 hours for Falcons fans, because they don't usually see their team do stuff like this. These are big moves to make what was going to be probably a pretty good team into a potentially great team. And there's a lot of excitement right now in Atlanta, and you can probably hear it in my voice. It's been fun to watch this develop, and now we get to see how they play together. Again, we haven't seen Judon and Simmons even practice yet. They haven't even been in the building yet in Flowery Branch. Hopefully, we'll see them on Monday for practice. They play. The Falcons are off on Friday. They play a preseason game on Saturday at noon against Baltimore in Baltimore. I don't think any stars are going to play in that game. Raheem Morris really hates the preseason. Hates it. I mean, he really doesn't. And so I think we'll see, potentially Simmons and Judon suiting up in Falcons uniforms on Monday for practice. So it's really exciting right now.
Yeah, I would listen. If I was a Falcons fan, I would be jumping in the air, because even though you may not got the best of their positions, you've got not one but 2 defensive players who are without question in the conversation and has been
elite players. Yeah.
Yeah, on a consistent basis. And then you pair them with Jesse Bates, you pair them with AJ Terrell, who a lot of people seem to forget about. And you look at the secondary, like, if you cornerback number 2, only thing you got to do is follow your mans. Mm-hmm. Read what the offense is doing, because you could just look back and be like, listen, I know who I got. They got it. I'm worried about you, bro. Come on, let's come get this work. That's what you saying if you're cornerback number 2, because look at what's around you. Then you that defensive line, you got that guy. All right. Now we could definitely handle our business because we know this cat right here is going to handle his. That's why he is, or that's why they are, as in Matthew Sutton and Justice Simmons, that's why they are ranked where they're ranked. And if I'm not mistaken, Justice Simmons this year was ranked, at least top 70 of the best players in the NFL, on that top 100 list of the NFL. So it's clear as day he's still got something in him. I think he will have enough to help out Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell, neutralize the other side of the field, which would definitely cause complications for a lot of opposing offenses, especially in a vulnerable division like the NFC South, who outside of, Tampa Bay and Atlanta on paper, you can argue don't have a quarterback, because against Jesse Bates alone, Derek Carr is kind of, inconsistent, even though the Falcons did lose bad the last time they saw the Saints. But you can argue with this team, it might not be that way this year. And I don't think they forgot about that, fake kneel or touchdown thing. So that's going to add a lot of fuel to the fire too. So speaking of that division, what are your overall thoughts on both the NFC conference with the team that you got right now in Atlanta, right now as we speak, and the NFC South division?
Well, let's start with the division in the NFC South. I think that, I don't think, but the Falcons were the betting favorite to win the division already before they brought in Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons in the last 48 hours. So I would say that percentage, that betting line is only going to go up in the favor of the Falcons. So the expectation is then they're going to win the division. They're going to be in the playoffs. That's the expectation, right? How far can they go from there if they do get there? The NFC has a lot of good teams. Let's be honest. San Francisco is still going to be there. We know that. Detroit is still going to be there.
We thought we would never say that.
What's that?
I thought we would never say that. Detroit.
Well, yeah, I know, but they're pretty damn good, and they've only gotten better potentially from last year. There's a lot of good teams. Green Bay could be pretty darn good this year. It's Dallas is good. Philadelphia is good. There's a lot of good teams in the NFC. The Falcons could put themselves kind of in that maybe second tier now, behind the San Franciscos, behind Detroit. They could possibly put themselves in that conversation with the Philadelphia, with the Dallas, with the Green Bay, in that realm, which is not something they could do the last few years. So it's a good position to be in. But with expectations comes expectations. Now the fan base, they see that they can be something. So if they don't deliver that, we know what happens. So like the pressure is on a little bit now, because now it's almost, all right, you bring in these two veteran guys who are Pro Bowlers. You sign Kirk Cousins. You better do something with that team this year, right? Because those guys are also there. Everyone's in their 30s. That time, is not, it's not running out next year, but it is limited. So you got to win. And they want to win now, and they're going to try to.
Yeah, and you got it. You have to applaud the new Falcons GM for what he did. Obviously, I think a legit argument could be made outside of the Houston Texans that the Steelers and the Falcons, the new eras, there has not been no other GMs in this league who define that better than these two cats right here. With the moves that both of these guys have made, they're showing you that we understand what we have currently right now in our team, and we want to build around that. So obviously you touched on it a little bit when you spoke on the expectations, and you said high expectations, practically a loaded roster, come accountability, right? So with that being said, what would be, outside of obviously making the playoffs, winning your division, what would be the floor and the ceiling for the team this season heading into 2024?
I would say the floor is, the floor is like anything else. Anything can happen in the NFL. Someone can get hurt. The Falcons lost two players last week in their preseason game in the first half. One with a season-ending injury, and one with we don't know how long he's going to be out. It's going to be a significant amount of time, according to Raheem Morris. So anything could happen tomorrow in the NFL. So the floor is still 7 wins probably. 7 wins, mediocrity. Mediocrity is probably the floor for this team. If they don't, I mean, I can't imagine them doing worse than that. But again, you never know. You never know what happens if Kirk Cousins gets hurt. They do have Michael Penix Jr. backing him up, but the NFL is a crazy world and it's completely unpredictable. So I would say the floor is 7 wins, and then the ceiling is maybe it could be 12 wins. I mean, that could be a ceiling. 12 wins. Win a playoff game or maybe 2. I mean, maybe go to the conference championship game. That could be the ceiling for the Falcons. I mean, that might be crazy. I mean, people might think that, that's hype, but it's possible now with the pieces they put in place. Also, you got to see how these 2 new guys gel with the defense too. And you got to see other guys got to step up as far as pass rushing with Budon, because as I mentioned, not only have the Falcons been bad at pass rushing, but they lost their 2 sack leaders into free agency, Calais Campbell and Bud Dupree. They both departed, and they both had 6.5 sacks last year. So that's 13 sacks unaccounted for on the Falcons roster. Now, maybe Matthew Judon can fill that by himself, but they got to find it somewhere else too. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens in Atlanta. It's the first time the team has really had this level of hope. This franchise has had this level of hope, and it's a city that, when there is this excitement, they really do come out and support. It could really catch fire here in the ATL. So we'll see. So I would say floor 7 wins, ceiling 12 wins, and a playoff victory.
Yep. You can't debate with that, because look what the Lions has done. Look what the Texans has done. Falcons been building this team 2-3 years now. They feel like they have the pieces. On paper, they do, but obviously you said it best when you said it's about what is done on the field, and it's a wait and see process. But if you are a Falcon fan, you have more than every right to be excited and to have high expectations, because we already disclosed this. They upgraded everywhere, and they're the one team you can argue that is won more than they lost, who has gained more than they lost this offseason, especially on defense. But speaking of the season, let's talk about this week, because you got TJ Watt, you got Minkah Fitzpatrick, you got Alex Highsmith, you got the newly signed former Baltimore Raven linebacker, I think first, Pro Bowl, All-Pro linebacker, Patrick Queen. You still got Cameron Hayward. And if I didn't mention Alex Highsmith, you got him and Joey Porter Jr. coming to town on defense. Offensively, you have Najee Harris, you have Jaylen Warren, you have George Pickens, you have Pat Freiermuth, you have Darnell Washington with the new quarterbacks as well, and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields coming to town. So how do you think the Falcons are using this offseason, along with the preseason and practices, to prepare for week 1 versus the Steelers in Atlanta, which will be their home opener this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the Steelers are going to be pretty solid this year. They got to get their quarterback situation figured out, right? Who's going to start.
But it's a great problem to have.
It's a good problem to have. And Justin Fields was a guy that at one point there was talks about him coming to Atlanta, and that didn't end up happening because they got Kirk Cousins. So it'll be really interesting to see. Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator, and he knows these guys really well. He knows Bijan Robinson, he knows Drake London, he knows Kyle Pitts. He knows what makes those guys tick, and that's going to be an advantage for him. And then for the Steelers coming into to Atlanta, I think it's going to be a hard game for the Falcons, because one thing Kirk Cousins has talked a lot about in training camp and even going back to OTAs in the spring is just a shared history. He's spoken a lot about how it's so different when you've been with a group for 3, 4, 5 years, like he had in Washington and then in Minnesota, and that chemistry and that gelling and everything, and how much easier it is to play with guys like that compared to the first year. So there is still those growing pains a little bit with the Drake Londons and the Kyle Pitts and so on and so forth, and Kirk Cousins. They're not clicking on all cylinders just yet. They've shown glimpses of that. But I think that, week 1, it'll also be Kirk Cousins' first game since he tore the Achilles. I do think it's going to be a tough game, because I do like the Steelers a lot this year. I think it's going to be a very tough game for the Falcons in week 1. But that's why they play the games, right? It's going to be real interesting. And I don't even know if they've started preparing for Pittsburgh yet, because they really got to worry about themselves. Because especially and now even more so on the defensive side, they got to figure out how Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons fit into new defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake's defense. How do they fit? How are they going to play? How is that going to change things? So they're going to have to play. They're going to have to hurry up a little bit because things are getting close. Week 1 is not too far away, so they got to kind of put things in acceleration. I don't think we see the Falcons really. I don't want to say peak, but I don't think we see the best version of the Falcons until closer to the middle of the season. If I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, Steelers is definitely going to be tough. Obviously, they want to rebound for their performance week 1 of last season, and they should. Firing Matt Canada, acquiring Arthur Smith, hiring him as the offensive coordinator. I think he did an exceptional job, like I already disclosed, in Tennessee. That's what led to him becoming the head coach there in Atlanta. But I think it's going to be more of that game. The winner of that game, to me, is going to be determined of which defense gives up the least and which offense can run the ball the most in the very best. Who could be more efficient? Will it be, Robinson, or would it be Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren? Because we both know they're going to share snaps. Can AJ Terrell neutralize George Pickens, which can definitely minimize, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields to either Van Jefferson or Calvin Austin, who is extremely underrated? Will we
or maybe Brandon Ayuk is in town by then if that trade ends up
happening. But I don't like the chances there. I'm looking more at DK Metcalf at this point with that. But that's just my take. But I'm praying. But we never know because offseason is crazy. They say they're coming with a deal in San Francisco. We haven't heard nothing yet. And we don't know what is really on Brandon Ayuk's mind until we hear from Brandon Ayuk himself. But I don't think that's going to happen until a deal is made, whether he's traded or whether he's extended. And I think that's one thing I'm going to hold off. But yeah, I think it's just going to be a ground and pound defensive battle and who runs the ball the best. And, well, may the best team win. But, Mark, that's all I have for you right now. Once again, thank you for coming on the show and for joining me at the very last minute. I wish you nothing but the best. Wish the Falcons the best. And 2024, here we go. It's going to be an exciting season. This is your host, SHAE, signing off. And this has been the SHAE Mac Show.
Thank you for tuning in to the very first episode of the SHAE Mac Show. This is your host, SHAE, signing out. Click the follow and subscribe button now for more episodes and to get updates on the show. To view more content from the show, give us a follow on your favorite platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and much more, all at the SHAE Mac Show. And you can give me, your host, a follow on those same platforms at SHAE Mac Sports.